Leonard Marsh had once been a man of prestige, a titan of industry whose very name commanded respect. As the CEO of Marsh & Company, he stood at the pinnacle of success, gracing the covers of business magazines, hosting lavish charity galas, and rubbing shoulders with the elite. He was a man who believed he was untouchable. But behind the grandeur lay a web of deception. Greed whispered in his ear, and he listened. He made shady financial deals, cut corners, and manipulated numbers to maintain the illusion of an ever-growing empire. Then, the reckoning came. A whistleblower, an anonymous voice from the shadows, exposed his empire's rotten core. Investigations ensued, headlines screamed of corruption, and within days, the world he had meticulously built crumbled beneath him. His assets were frozen, his company dissolved, and his name became a curse in business circles. The very people who once toasted to his success now turned their backs on him. His so-called friends abandoned him, business partners refused to take his calls, and his once loyal employees spat his name in disdain. Disgraced and penniless, Leonard wandered the streets of the very city where he once reigned. The towering skyscrapers, which he had once called his domain, now loomed over him like silent judges. He carried nothing but a small duffel bag, filled with remnants of a life that no longer existed. The luxurious penthouse was gone, the designer suits replaced by threadbare clothing. Hunger gnawed at him, a feeling he had never known, and the cold nights on park benches stripped away his last shreds of pride. He was nothing now, a man whose fall from grace had been swift, brutal, and absolute. It had been days since Leonard had eaten a proper meal. His stomach twisted in agony as he sat hunched on a street corner, his once powerful hands now trembling from exhaustion. He had spent his last dollar on a cup of coffee that barely warmed his fingers. Pride had kept him from begging, but desperation was quickly eroding his resolve. The faces of passers-by blurred into indifference, their hurried steps a cruel reminder of the life he had lost. Then, a familiar voice cut through the haze of his despair.
"Mr. Marsh, is that you?"
Leonard looked up, squinting against the setting sun. Standing before him was an old man in a worn-out uniform, Mr. Henshaw, the janitor who had once worked in the glistening halls of Marsh & Company. The same halls where Leonard had once walked with his head held high, barely acknowledging those beneath him. Now, the roles were reversed. Leonard wanted to recoil, to hide from the shame burning inside him. But there was nowhere to run.
I didn't know where else to go,"
he muttered. Mr. Henshaw didn't hesitate. He reached into the paper bag he was carrying and handed Leonard a sandwich.
"Eat,"
he said simply. Leonard hesitated for only a moment before devouring the meal, the taste of kindness mingling with his hunger. That night, Mr. Henshaw brought Leonard to his modest home, a small, cluttered apartment, but warm and welcoming.
"You can stay here for a while,"
he said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world to offer shelter to a man who had once ignored him. Over the next few weeks, Leonard met others who had suffered their own losses, people who had once held steady jobs, only to be undone by circumstances beyond their control. They shared their stories, their struggles, and their resilience. Through their generosity, Leonard found himself doing the unthinkable, accepting help. When Mr. Henshaw suggested he work at a local diner washing dishes, Leonard nearly refused. The thought of scrubbing plates, of being seen in such a lowly position, filled him with shame. But then he saw the way Mr. Henshaw looked at him, not with pity, but with quiet encouragement. And so, with a deep breath, Leonard picked up the sponge and began to wash. For the first time in his life, he worked not for wealth, but for survival. And in that humbling moment, the first cracks in his arrogance began to break away. Months passed, and Leonard transformed from a man barely surviving to a man with purpose. The once proud tycoon had been reduced to the humblest of laborers, but with every plate he scrubbed, a layer of his old arrogance was washed away. And with each passing day, he found himself drawn deeper into the struggles of those around him. The people in the community weren't just faces in a crowd anymore. They were stories, battles, and resilience personified. He listened to the single mother working 3 jobs to feed her children, the war veteran struggling with PTSD, the young man who had lost everything to a gambling addiction. Their pain mirrored his own, and for the first time, he didn't see himself as superior. He saw himself as one of them. One evening, as he wiped down the diner's counter, he overheard an elderly woman sobbing quietly at a corner table. She had just received an eviction notice and had nowhere to go. Leonard, feeling an unfamiliar urge to help, approached her. With the knowledge he had spent years using for personal gain, he sat down and helped her go through her financial situation, identifying legal aid options and a rent assistance program she had never known existed. When she thanked him through her tears, something inside him shifted. It wasn't gratitude he had sought. It was the feeling of making a difference. One evening, as Leonard was clearing tables at the diner, a man in a crisp suit watched him with keen interest. Daniel Crawford, a respected investor, had been quietly observing Leonard for weeks. That night, he finally approached.
"I know who you are, Leonard,"
Daniel said, leaning forward.
"I've read about your past. But what intrigues me is not who you were, but who you are now."
Leonard tensed, bracing for mockery or judgment. Instead, Daniel smiled.
"You have a sharp mind. I can see it in the way you handle things here, how you help people, how you solve problems. I have a business that needs someone with your insight, not as a CEO, not with unchecked power, but as a consultant."
Leonard's heart pounded.
A job.
A chance to step back into the corporate world, but on different terms. Yet fear gripped him. What if he fell into old habits? What if greed took hold again? Mr. Henshaw, having overheard, placed a reassuring hand on Leonard's shoulder.
You've changed, son. And now you have something you never had before, accountability.
With a deep breath, Leonard met Daniel's gaze.
I accept.
And with that, a new chapter of his life began. Not one driven by ambition, but by purpose. With his newfound position, Leonard worked tirelessly to ensure ethical business practices, using his skills to uplift those in need. His greatest act of gratitude came when he handed Mr. Henshaw the keys to a new home, a quiet, warm place free of struggle. Tears welled in the old janitor's eyes as he embraced Leonard.
You saved me when I had nothing.
Leonard whispered, voice thick with emotion.
Now, let me do the same for you.
For the first time in his life, Leonard understood that true wealth wasn't in money or status. It was in grace, humility, and the unmerited favor that had redeemed him forever.